When we talk about a narcissistic husband, we're not talking about someone who simply has flaws. We all do. We're talking about someone who uses those flaws as weapons against the very person who should feel safest with him, his wife. At the beginning, he may come across as charming, attentive, even too good to be true. And that's the point. It's not love, it's a hook. He wants to draw her in with warmth so that later she'll doubt her own reality when the warmth is replaced with coldness. When things go wrong, notice this: he never stands in the mirror. Every mistake, every conflict, every challenge somehow finds its way back to his wife's shoulders. He is always the victim and she is always the problem. Instead of partnership, he takes. He drains her energy, her confidence, her joy, without refilling any of it. And when she asks for more, when she dares to need something, suddenly she's too much. Criticism becomes his favorite tool. It's not loud insults always. Sometimes it's quiet digs, disguised as advice. I'm just trying to help. But what it really does is chip away at her confidence until she questions her own worth. A narcissistic husband knows that if his wife has strong support, she won't stay under his control, so he isolates her. Not all at once, but slowly. A little distance here, a little discouragement there. Until one day, she looks around and realizes she's standing alone with only him. And love? Love is no longer love. It becomes a transaction. He gives affection only when it serves him, only when it makes him look good, or only when she bends herself small enough to fit his ego. That's the cycle. That's the trap. And it's why so many women feel stuck, doubting themselves, while the world sees him as charming. But behind closed doors, she knows the truth because she's living it. The message here is clear. Recognizing these patterns is not about blame. It's about freedom. Because the moment you see it for what it is, you begin to remember your worth. And the truth is, no one deserves to live small so someone else can feel big. He often begins with affection, but it quickly turns into manipulation. That is the pattern of a narcissistic husband, and it is one of the most dangerous traps a woman can fall into because it feels so real in the beginning. He knows how to put on a performance of love, charm, and attention that can sweep his wife off her feet. In those early days, he listens closely. He remembers the little details. He showers her with compliments, and he convinces her that she is the most important person in his world. She starts to believe she has found someone who truly sees her, someone who values her in ways no one else ever has. And for a while, it feels perfect. That's how the cycle begins. But over time, the affection that once felt genuine begins to shift into something else. His compliments become rare, and when they do appear, they are often tied to what she does for him, not who she is. He starts to use the very details he once praised against her. The things she shared in trust are later twisted into weapons to control or belittle her. For example, if she admitted once that she feels insecure about her looks, he may later make subtle comments that play on that insecurity, keeping her questioning herself and lowering her confidence. What was once a place of safety becomes a tool for manipulation. The charm he once displayed doesn't vanish, it just changes direction. He saves it for others, for people outside the home who see him as kind, generous, and loving. Meanwhile, his wife sees the other side, the side hidden behind closed doors, where affection is no longer freely given. Instead, it is conditional. She only receives warmth when she behaves the way he wants her to, when she agrees with him, when she sacrifices her needs for his. The love that was once abundant now feels like a prize she has to earn, and no matter how much she gives, it is never quite enough. That's where the control sets in. He begins to dictate what she should wear, who she should see, and how she should act. Sometimes it's subtle suggestions disguised as care, like, "I just don't think those friends are good for you," or "I want you to be the best version of yourself, so maybe don't dress like that." Other times it's outright commands, leaving her feeling trapped between wanting to please him and wanting to stay true to herself. Slowly, she learns that going against his expectations leads to withdrawal, coldness, or even anger. What makes this pattern so dangerous is that she often clings to the memory of the man he pretended to be at the beginning. She remembers the affection, the kindness, the charm, and she hopes that if she just tries hard enough, that version of him will come back. But the truth is, that version was never real. It was bait. The reality is that the affection was always a mask, and once she is caught in his cycle, control replaces care, and manipulation replaces love. This is why it is so important to see the pattern clearly, because once you understand that the charm at the beginning was not love but a strategy, you stop waiting for something that never truly existed. And when that realization comes, so does freedom. Because love that starts with affection should never turn into control. And anyone who makes you shrink just so they can feel bigger never truly loved you in the first place. Nothing is his fault, and every mistake gets pinned on his wife. That is one of the clearest signs of a narcissistic husband. He refuses to accept responsibility for his actions, no matter how obvious the evidence is. Instead of looking inward and admitting that he made a mistake, he quickly turns the spotlight outward, making sure someone else takes the fall. And in his world, that someone is almost always his wife. At first, it may seem small, like blaming her for being late to a dinner because she took too long to get ready, even though he was the one who spent extra time on his phone. Or blaming her for his bad mood, insisting that she must have said something wrong. These little moments may not seem like much in isolation, but over time they create a heavy pattern. When everything that goes wrong somehow becomes her fault, she begins to doubt her own perception of reality. If the bills are unpaid, it's because she didn't remind him. If he loses his temper, it's because she pushed him too far. If he forgets something important, it's because she didn't write it down. There's always an excuse, and the excuse always lands at her feet. This constant shifting of blame creates a cycle where she feels responsible for problems she didn't cause, and guilt for situations she couldn't control. What makes this manipulation so damaging is that it is subtle enough to seem believable. He uses her trust against her. He might say things like, "You know how forgetful I am. Why didn't you help me remember?" Or, "If you had just listened to me, this wouldn't have happened." Over time, she begins to absorb the message that she is the one who is flawed, that she is the reason their life feels chaotic. And the more she accepts that false narrative, the easier it becomes for him to escape accountability completely. A narcissistic husband doesn't stop at shifting blame for small things. He applies it everywhere. If his career isn't progressing, it's because she distracts him or doesn't support him enough. If their marriage feels strained, it's because she doesn't know how to keep him happy. If he cheats, it's because she wasn't giving him what he needed. No matter how selfish or destructive his actions may be, he finds a way to twist them into her fault. This deflection serves two purposes. It protects his fragile ego from facing the truth, and it keeps her under his control by making her feel guilty and inadequate. Eventually, the weight of constant blame takes a toll. She feels like she is walking on eggshells, trying to prevent problems before they happen, even though the outcome never changes. She apologizes for things she didn't do just to keep the peace. She sacrifices her own needs in hopes of preventing his anger, and in the process, she loses her sense of self. That is the power of blame when it's weaponized. It doesn't just change the narrative, it changes the way a person sees herself. The truth, however, is simple. No healthy relationship works this way. Love and partnership means sharing responsibility, admitting when you're wrong, and growing together. A narcissistic husband avoids all of that by making his wife carry the burden alone. And once she sees the pattern for what it is, she can begin to understand that no matter how convincing his words sound, his mistakes were never her fault to carry. He drains emotionally, mentally, and sometimes financially while offering little in return. A narcissistic husband is skilled at taking everything he can from his wife while giving back as little as possible. In the beginning, he may appear generous, thoughtful, and willing to invest in the relationship, but over time, the balance shifts heavily in his favor. He expects her to meet his needs, his desires, and his demands without question. The more she gives, the more he takes, and the more he takes, the less he feels any need to give back. What should be a partnership turns into a one-sided arrangement where she becomes the constant provider of support, comfort, and sacrifice, while he becomes the constant receiver. Emotionally, he drains her by expecting endless validation. He wants her to constantly reassure him, praise him, and boost his ego. If he feels insecure, it's her job to lift him up. If he feels angry, it's her job to calm him down. If he feels unappreciated by others, it's her job to remind him how special he is. But when she needs comfort or understanding, he dismisses her pain, mocks her feelings, or turns the focus back onto himself. Slowly, she learns that her emotions don't matter as much as his, and that her role is to keep pouring into him without ever expecting to be filled herself. Mentally, he exhausts her with his constant demands and shifting expectations. She spends her energy anticipating his moods, carefully choosing her words, and strategizing how to avoid conflict. She may lie awake at night replaying conversations, wondering what she said wrong, or planning how to handle the next outburst. Over time, this kind of mental strain leaves her drained and anxious, always on alert, never truly at peace. While she carries the weight of trying to keep the relationship balanced, he relaxes into the comfort of knowing she will do all the work. Financially, the imbalance can be just as destructive. He may expect her to manage the household while he controls the money, leaving her dependent on him for every expense. Or he may spend recklessly, indulging in luxuries while criticizing her for minor purchases. In some cases, he may refuse to contribute fairly, expecting her to carry the financial burden without complaint. No matter the form it takes, the financial dynamic reflects the same pattern. He takes and she gives until she feels depleted. And the tragedy is that many women in this position begin to normalize this imbalance. They convince themselves that if they just give a little more, he will eventually notice, appreciate, and return the effort. But with a narcissistic husband, the giving is never enough because his hunger for attention, validation, and control is endless. He doesn't view love as a mutual exchange, but as a resource to be extracted. True love requires reciprocity. It requires both partners to give, to support, and to nurture each other equally. When one partner only takes, the relationship ceases to be love and becomes exploitation. And once a wife recognizes that her constant giving is not met with even the simplest forms of respect, care, or gratitude, she begins to see the truth. She was never loved for who she is, only used for what she could provide, and no one deserves to be emptied so that another can feel full. His advice cuts deeper than it heals, making her doubt herself. A narcissistic husband rarely criticizes directly in the beginning. Instead, he cloaks his words in concern, as if he's only trying to help. This is where the manipulation lies. What seems like guidance is really a slow erosion of her self-worth. He might tell her, "I'm just being honest," or "I only want the best for you." But beneath those phrases is a sharp blade that slices into her confidence. What makes this tactic so powerful is that it creates confusion. She wonders if he is really being caring or if he is actually tearing her down. Over time, the doubt becomes so strong that she stops trusting her own instincts. At first, the comments may sound harmless. He might say, "That dress doesn't suit you. I think you'd look better in something else." Or, "Are you sure you want to say it like that? You don't sound very smart." On the surface, these sound like opinions or suggestions, but when repeated consistently, they begin to plant seeds of insecurity. She starts second-guessing her choices, her words, even her appearance, because the person she trusts most keeps implying that she is not enough as she is. What he labels as care is really control. The criticism often comes at moments when she is most vulnerable. If she shares an idea she is excited about, he quickly points out flaws instead of celebrating her effort. If she talks about a dream or goal, he reminds her why it's unrealistic. If she expresses joy about something small, he diminishes it by saying it's not worth getting excited over. Little by little, her spark fades because every time she shows herself, he strikes it down with a disguised insult. The more she listens, the more she starts to believe she is incapable, unattractive, or unintelligent. The danger in this kind of disguised criticism is that it wears the mask of love. He tells her he is only being truthful, only helping her improve, only protecting her from embarrassment. And because she wants to believe he has her best interests at heart, she internalizes his words instead of questioning his intentions. This creates a cycle where she seeks his approval more and more, trying to adjust herself to avoid his helpful remarks. But the approval never comes because his goal was never to help her grow, it was to keep her small. Over time, she begins to police herself. She hesitates before speaking. She second-guesses her clothing choices. She hides parts of herself that once made her confident. She has learned that if she dares to shine, he will dim her light with his carefully disguised critiques. And while the world may see him as honest, caring, and straightforward, she knows the reality. His advice leaves her feeling weaker, not stronger. The truth is, care should never make someone feel smaller. Real love builds, it encourages, it uplifts. When words cut deeper than they heal, they are not acts of care, but acts of control. And once she recognizes that his criticism was never about helping her, but about holding her down, she can begin to rebuild her voice, her confidence, and her worth. Because no advice that makes you doubt yourself is love. It is only manipulation dressed as concern. He slowly distances her from friends, family, and support systems. That is one of the most calculated moves of a narcissistic husband because isolation gives him full control. At the beginning of the relationship, he may seem supportive of her connections. He might smile when she talks about her family, encourage her to spend time with friends, and even join in to make a good impression. But as time passes, his attitude changes. Little comments start to appear, subtle enough that she doesn't recognize them as red flags. Your friend doesn't really get you like I do. Your family meddles too much in our business. Why do you even waste time with them when you could be with me? These remarks seem harmless at first, but they begin to plant doubt in her mind. The process is never sudden. He doesn't demand she cut everyone off overnight. Instead, he chips away piece by piece, slowly convincing her that her loved ones don't truly support her, don't really understand her, or don't want the best for her. He frames himself as the only person she can truly rely on. When she tries to defend her relationships, he turns it into a conflict, making her feel guilty for even wanting to spend time with others. Eventually, it becomes easier for her to stay quiet and avoid the argument than to fight for her connections. Over time, invitations from friends and family may decrease, not because they don't care, but because they feel pushed away. He might create tension during family visits, act cold toward her friends, or start arguments right before she leaves the house, making social gatherings feel like a burden instead of a joy. Slowly, the circle that once gave her strength begins to shrink, leaving him at the center. And once he has positioned himself as her main source of companionship, he gains the power to control her completely. The isolation isn't just about removing people, it's about removing her perspective. When she is surrounded by loved ones, she has mirrors that reflect her true worth, voices that remind her she deserves respect, and people who can recognize unhealthy patterns. But when he cuts those voices out, hers is the only reality shaped by his words. Without support, his criticism feels truer, his blame feels justified, and his manipulation feels normal. And this is how isolation becomes a power play. It weakens her sense of self until she relies solely on him for validation, even if that validation rarely comes. The saddest part is that many women in this situation don't realize how much distance has grown between them and the people who care about them. By the time they notice, it feels as though bridges have already been burned. That is exactly how he wants it. Because the less support she has, the harder it becomes for her to leave. But the truth is that isolation is not love. Love encourages connection, not disconnection. A partner who truly cares wants to see you surrounded by support, not stripped of it. Once she recognizes that his power depends on her loneliness, she can begin to see the strategy for what it is, and the moment she reaches back toward those connections, no matter how much time has passed, she takes the first step toward freedom. Because no one deserves to be cut off from the people who remind them of their worth. Affection only appears when she serves his ego, otherwise it vanishes. This is the painful reality of living with a narcissistic husband. In the early stages, love may have seemed constant, overwhelming even, as though she had found someone who cherished her completely. He likely showered her with compliments, gestures of romance, and declarations of devotion that felt genuine, but that love wasn't unconditional, it was bait. Over time, she learns that his affection is not freely given, but strategically withheld and offered only when it benefits him. What should be an act of love becomes a transaction, where she must earn scraps of warmth by meeting his endless demands. When she agrees with him, praises him, or sacrifices her own needs to prioritize his, he rewards her with attention and affection. In those moments, he seems tender, caring, even loving, which convinces her to keep trying harder to please him. But the second she expresses her own opinion, challenges his behavior, or fails to meet his expectations, the affection disappears. Suddenly he grows cold, distant, or even hostile, leaving her wondering what she did wrong. This inconsistency creates confusion and insecurity, making her feel like she must constantly perform to keep his love alive. This pattern is powerful because it teaches her to associate love with conditions. She begins to believe that love is not something she inherently deserves, but something she must work for. If she is quiet enough, agreeable enough, beautiful enough, or selfless enough, then maybe she will be rewarded with his attention again. The affection becomes a prize, and she becomes trapped in a cycle of chasing approval that never lasts. The danger lies in the unpredictability. One day he may be warm and kind, and the next he may withdraw completely. She never knows which version of him she will face, so she spends her energy trying to anticipate his moods and avoid triggering his rejection. Over time, this emotional roller coaster erodes her self-esteem. She begins to feel like she is walking on eggshells, terrified of losing the only moments of closeness she still clings to. What makes this even more destructive is the way he weaponizes intimacy. When he wants to reassert control or punish her, he may withhold physical touch, kind words, or even simple acknowledgement. The silent treatment becomes his tool of choice, forcing her to beg for affection or apologize just to restore peace. And when he finally gives in and shows warmth again, it feels like a relief rather than a right. That relief keeps her tied to the cycle, believing the problem lies in her behavior rather than his manipulation. But real love does not vanish when mistakes are made. Real love does not demand obedience or sacrifice of identity as payment for affection. Real love is consistent, steady, and freely given, even in moments of disagreement. A narcissistic husband turns love into a weapon, not a gift, using it to control rather than to connect. And once she recognizes that the affection she receives is not genuine but conditional, she can begin to see the truth. Love should never feel like a reward for submission, because true love does not disappear when it is most needed. In the end, the way a narcissistic husband treats his wife is not love, it is control, manipulation, and erosion of her identity. From charm that turns into control, to blame that is always shifted. From constant taking without giving, to criticism disguised as care. From isolating her from the world to making love conditional, the pattern is clear. It is a cycle that keeps her small, doubtful, and dependent, while he grows stronger at her expense. But recognizing these patterns is the beginning of breaking free, because once the mask is lifted, once she sees the truth for what it is, she can reclaim her voice, her strength, and her worth.